Just want to welcome everyone to today's ALS Town Hall presented by the ALS Therapy Development Institute. Today's town hall is an intro to brain-computer interface technology and its applications in ALS. And first off, just want to thank our sponsors, Cytokinetics, Biogen, Mitsubishi Tanabe Pharma of America, InSource Services, Novartis, Unicure, Ionis, Regeneron, and Eledon Pharmaceuticals for making this possible. Um, you just heard from Carol Hamilton, our Senior Vice President of Development, and my name is John Gang. I'm the Senior Manager of Science and Brand Communications. We're going to be the team from ALS TDI who will be talking to you today. And just a quick agenda. Today, we are going to run through just a fast introduction to ALS TDI and who we are. And then we're going to hear an introduction to BCI technology and its applications in ALS from Jessica Kellerman, the program manager of the Implantable Brain Computer Interface Collaborative Community, and she's also at MGH, and Dr. Daniel B. Rubin, MD, Ph.D., who's a neurologist and researcher at MGH and Assistant Professor of Neurology at Harvard Medical School. And then we will open things up to you guys to ask your questions and have a town hall discussion. So, at the ALS Therapy Development Institute, our mission is to discover and develop treatments for everyone with ALS. ALSCI is a community-funded biotech. We were the first ever nonprofit biotech founded in 1999 by the family of Stephen Haywood. You can see Stephen, he is in the top right picture over here in the orange shirt. And Stephen was diagnosed with ALS at the age of 29. And when his family, who is also in that picture, found out there were no treatments for Stephen's disease, they decided to do something about it, and founded the organization in their basement in Newton, Massachusetts. So you can see that's our first office. And today, a little more than 25 years later, we are the most comprehensive drug discovery lab in the world, focused solely on ALS, with a state-of-the-art laboratory in Watertown, Massachusetts. And we put 87 cents of every dollar we raise into finding effective treatments and cures for ALS. And Stephen passed away in 2006, but you can see the picture down there on the right. That is his son and some other members of his family in our lab with some of our scientists. So that family spirit is still the central part of everything we do. And at ALS-TDI, we seek to fulfill our mission by being the drug discovery engine for ALS. And what this means is we know it will take many treatments to end this disease for everyone who has it. So we do the rigorous research that is needed to fill the ALS clinical pipeline with potential treatments. We do this by working in our lab to discover and invent potential ALS treatments and drugs. Then, unlike a traditional biotech company that would follow the treatment through trials and then bring it to market if it was approved, we partner with others to ensure that those drugs advance to trial, but we go back to the drawing board. And we will continue to do this over and over again, looking for more and more treatments to fight this disease until everyone with ALS has effective treatments. And in the 26 or so years that we've been around, we have rigorously tested over 550 drugs in animal models of ALS, which is more than any other ALS research lab in the world. We were the first nonprofit biotech to invent a potential ALS treatment, tegoprubart, and bring it from our own lab through FDA review and into clinical trials. And we launched the ALS Research Collaborative, or ARC, which is the longest running natural history study in ALS and is available to anyone living with ALS anywhere in the world. And if you are on this call and you have ALS and are not signed up for it, we hope it's something that you'll consider. And just a little more about the ARC study. As I said, anyone with ALS or asymptomatic gene carriers can participate. It is all completely remote, and you decide what data you want to submit and how often. And you could potentially share data, including personal and medical history, blood samples, voice and movement recordings, and ALS FRS scores. And yes, even those blood samples, we will send a phlebotomist to your home if you are eligible and to collect those. So it is all remote. And then you can access all of that data via a secure online portal. And that data helps shape research both at ALS-CDI, but also that de-identified information is also shared with researchers around the world at other institutions to help advance ALS drug discovery. Then another service we just want to make sure people are aware of that we offer the ALS community is the ALS Trial Navigator, which is a innovative set of online tools to help match people with ALS to trials and studies and help you make informed decisions about what you might want to participate in. And using these tools, you can easily explore global research opportunities throughout the US and also throughout the world. And both interventional drug studies and observational studies. You can get tailored recommendations by answering a questionnaire about your personal history and preferences that will unlock a personalized list of trials that you might be eligible for and might meet your criteria. And you can create a personalized portal with an account to save, annotate, and bookmark trials that you might be interested in. And with that, I will hand things off to Jessica and Daniel.
All right, thank you so much. I will go ahead and share my screen. Oops. All right. Hello, everyone. So I am Jessica Kellerman, and I am honored to be here with you all. I'm the program manager of the Implantable Brain-Computer Interface Collaborative Community, and my work really centers around bringing people together to drive innovation for implantable brain-computer interfaces through structured collaboration. And today I'm joined here by Dan Rubin, a neurologist at Massachusetts General Hospital and a co-lead of one of the IBCICC work groups. Our goal today is to demystify implantable brain-computer interfaces and share a bit about the IBCICC and how you can get involved. Since Dan and I are coming to you as representatives of the IBCICC, I'd like to start by briefly introducing what the IBCICC is, and then I'll go ahead and hand it over to Dan so he can tell you more about implantable brain-computer interfaces. So we are made up of a wide range of over 400 stakeholders, including researchers, clinicians, regulatory experts, industry leaders, patient advocates, ethicists, and most importantly, people with lived experience of paralysis and their care partners. We are the first FDA participating collaborative community in the clinical neurosciences, and we're so fortunate to be able to gain and share perspectives with the incredible people at FDA's Neurologic Devices Office. Now, ordinarily, when companies and academic researchers interact with federal regulators, those conversations usually happen properly and for good reason in confidential silos. The IBCICC provides for open, transparent discussion across stakeholders in a carefully constructed pre-competitive space. And this unique forum was created to reach well-informed consensus across a range of key issues in order to advance the development, safety and efficacy evaluation, and wide and equitable access to IBCI technologies. So with that, I'll go ahead and hand it over to Dan, who will tell you a bit more about what IBCIs are.
Thanks, Jessica. Hi, everyone. So as Jessica said, my name's Dan Rubin. I'm a neurologist at Mass General and do a lot of work on implantable brain-computer interfaces. And so I'm really delighted to have the opportunity to tell you all about what they are and why we're working on them. If you go to the next slide, Jessica. Um, Broadly speaking, IBCIs, or implantable brain-computer interfaces, are a type of medical technology that are being developed to help people with paralysis. Today, of course, we're going to focus on their role and potential application for people with ALS. They've been developed potentially to address a number of different needs that people with paralysis have. A lot of the work that's been done thus far and a lot of what we're going to talk about focuses on communication being sort of one of our primary needs as a people is our ability to communicate. But really, they do so much more. IBCIs have been used to help support people maintain their work and work in their home environment, work complete obligations they need to manage their finances, to handle shopping, to communicate with healthcare providers, but also to surf the web, play games, really anything that might be more difficult to do if you have weakness. IBCIs are meant to help. And the reason is, if you can go to the next slide, Jessica, is that movement and speech is really how we as people interact with the world around us, right? So anytime that you've got a thought or intention, that thought or intention originates in your cerebral cortex, in the part of your brain that sort of sits on the outside, is kind of the lumpy, bump. I've got a scale model here, right? Your cerebral cortex is that part of the brain on the outside, and that's really the part of the brain that makes us us. Right? That's the part of the brain that has your memories, personalities, intentions, thoughts, sense of humor. And once you decide that you want to do something, all of the cerebral cortex sends some electrical impulses that wind up in a part of the brain called the primary motor cortex, which is roughly here on the side of your head. And then the primary motor cortex sends some electrical impulses down through the brainstem into the spinal cord and out into the nerves to the muscles, and that allows you to move. And so if you want to, for example, control a computer cursor on a screen by moving a mouse, you move your hand to do that. If you want to walk, you're moving the muscles in your legs. And what I'm doing right now is I'm talking, and I'm, of course, moving the muscles in my face and my mouth. But in conditions that cause paralysis, if you can go to the next slide, Jessica, um, those signals get interrupted somewhere along the way. So for people who've had stroke, they may get interrupted before those signals even leave the brain. For someone with a spinal cord injury, they can get interrupted there. And someone with ALS, they can get interrupted in the motor neurons, in the nerves that carry the signals from the motor cortex out to whatever, particular muscles trying to move. Um, and what brain-computer interfaces do, if you can go to the next slide, is take advantage of the fact that in conditions like ALS, the cerebral cortex, that part of the brain that makes us us, is intact. All right, the transmission from that signal gets interrupted somewhere downstream, but the person still knows what they want to do and can generate the intention to do whatever it is they want to do or say whatever they want to say. And so brain-computer interfaces are exactly that. It's an interface between someone's brain and a computer that basically fills in the gap. And so the way that they work, all brain-computer interfaces, and then we'll focus on a particular subset, is they start with some sort of sensor. There's some sort of electrical device that's listening to the activity in or around primary motor cortex, listening to the electrical signals that are being generated by the brain as someone wants to move. Those electrical signals are then sent to a computer, and a computer can decode those signals. So the sensors record the electrical activity in the part of the brain that generates the intention to move. The computer looks at those signals and tries to figure out in real time what is the person trying to do based on this pattern of electrical activity. And then the computer sends those signals to some other piece of technology, be it a smartphone or a desktop computer or a robotic limb or a motorized powered wheelchair, and gives the person the ability to control that device simply by thinking about the movement that they want to make. If we can go to the next slide. There are, and if you do research on BCIs on the internet or look up other papers, there's two broad classes of brain-computer interfaces. As you can tell from the name of our group, we focus predominantly on the implantable brain-computer interfaces, and I'll tell you why. But just to provide some context, so there's two broad classes, and they really come down to what kind of sensors are used to listen to those brain signals. So there's implantable brain-computer interfaces, and then there's wearable or non-implantable brain-computer interfaces. The wearable BCIs basically use what are called EEG leads. So if you've ever seen someone or yourself have had an EEG, they basically just take some electrodes and they either tape them to your forehead, or now there's caps and bands, things that you can basically take on, take off. You might need some help to do, depending on how complex the device is, but it's not invasive. There's no surgery involved. And these can record brain signals directly from the surface of the skin, from the scalp. So they have the advantage that they don't require surgery, but they have the disadvantage that the signals that they record are generally very low amplitude and very noisy and don't contain very much information. And the reason is that when brain cells are talking to each other and passing along messages about what someone's trying to do or what movement they're trying to make, the individual brain cells are communicating with incredibly small electrical signals. These are electrical signals that you can measure in microvolts, so millionths of a volt, and they're very fast. They're very small and they're very fast. So the little impulses or action potentials that one brain cell sends to another are usually on the order of about 1 to 3 milliseconds long. So a millionth of a volt lasting about 1,000th of a second. So when you have a wearable BCI sensor like an EEG or one of those caps that you see, those sensors that are sitting on the surface of the brain need to record the average activity of millions of brain cells in order for there to be a signal that can then be sent into a computer. And so when you're averaging the activity of millions of individual brain cells, each of which is giving a slightly different message to its neighbor, what you end up with is a sort of noisy signal that doesn't contain that much information about what someone's trying to do at any one point in time. In contrast, the implantable brain-computer interfaces use sensors that are actually placed, in general, directly on the surface of the brain. Now, this requires a surgery, so generally that means that you need a neurosurgeon to place the sensors on the surface of the brain, and then once they're there, they stay there for as long as the person has the implantable brain-computer interface. But these sensors that are placed directly on the cortical surface can record the electrical activity from populations of individual brain cells. So you can record from dozens up to, with some of the newer devices, thousands of individual brain cells in very high spatial and temporal resolution. So you can record those very, very small signals happening very quickly from, again, hundreds or thousands of brain cells all at once. And you can, from that recording, extract an incredible quantity of information that gives you the ability to do some really impressive decoding. And we'll talk about what that looks like in just a little bit. So we can go to the next slide. So an important question that comes up is how are IPCIs different from other assistive technologies? And you can hop to the next one. So as this audience is no doubt familiar, there's any number of different assistive technologies that exist to help people with ALS. If you can go to the next slide. Um, and these vary in their capabilities, so how much they're actually able to do, which you can to some extent, think about how much autonomy do they restore for the individuals using them, along with their technological complexity, right? So at one end, you've got things like eye gaze tracking technology that's pretty technologically sophisticated and can give you a fair bit of control. At the other end of the spectrum, you can have things like individual switches or even very low-tech assistive technology, things like word boards or letter boards. But all of these assistive technologies are limited in a couple of major ways. They all, of course, to some extent or another, rely on having a care partner who's there to help you work with it. And even the most sophisticated technologies, things like the eye gaze tracking systems, have their limitations. And again, I'm sure many folks on this call are familiar with this technology, but many of the devices, people tell us they're error prone, they're rather slow, they require recalibration, they may not work in all lighting conditions. Um, and so what IBCIs, intend to do and tend to differ from the if you will, from these technologies, is that they become sort of part of the person. They're always there, and when they're in their completed form, they require a minimal amount of caregiver's assistance. This is something that someone can have available to them 24/7. The analogy, to some extent, although it's an imperfect one, is sort of the difference between glasses that you can take on or take off for restoring a refractive error for your vision, as opposed to getting something like LASIK eye surgery, where once you have it done, then you don't need glasses anymore. And so you could imagine if, wearing glasses required interacting with a care partner to help you recalibrate them and fix them multiple times a day, you'd be inclined to find something that would be a bit more reliable. We can go to the next slide. Um, a question that comes up, because these are implanted devices, is are they safe, and what are the risks associated with this sort of technology? And so an important point to make, and one that I'll stress now, but I think it will become clear as we continue talking, is that at the moment, all implantable brain-computer interfaces uh, that one would want to use are undergoing clinical trials. So there are no currently approved brain-computer interfaces that one can just have implanted that are currently available for use. So if you want to use a BCI, you have to, at least right now, enroll in a clinical trial. So this has the advantages that at the moment they're under really intense regulatory scrutiny. So they're overseen by the FDA as well as the institutional review boards of all the institutions that are conducting these trials. With that said, there are a number of trials that are ongoing, and it's our hope that in the coming years, some of these devices will make it through the clinical trial pipeline and become available. There is some published data from some of these early clinical trials describing the safety of these devices, and the general upshot of these clinical trials is that they're about as safe as any other implantable neurotechnologies, and that's a sort of loaded term. But there are other medical devices that are FDA approved for use that involve implants in the brain, things like deep brain stimulators for people who have Parkinson's disease. There's similar devices that help people who have refractory seizures due to severe forms of epilepsy. And there's a strong history of clinical practice for these types of technologies. And in the limited data that's been published thus far, implantable brain-computer interfaces seem to have a similar safety profile. They have the typical risk factors you associate with surgery, but past that are generally well tolerated. And people who've been in clinical trials have done really well. If we can go to the next slide. So what do these devices actually do, and who can they help? So as I mentioned, at the moment, all of the research on IBCIs has really been focused on helping restore autonomy, independence, mobility, communication for people who have paralysis. ALS has been one of the primary patient populations that's been thought about as being able to potentially benefit from this technology. Also, people with spinal cord injury, certain types of strokes, cerebral palsy, other motor impairments, also people who've had amputations as well. And again, what all of these conditions have in common is that people have paralysis that's limiting their independence and autonomy, but their cerebral cortex is intact, and they know what they want to say, they know what they want to do, and this is a technology that's designed to make that possible. There's hope that in the future, the potential populations that could benefit could be broadened to a number of other conditions, things like neurocognitive disorders, but that's really a ways down the way. That's much further down the pipeline. Really, the focus at the moment is on paralysis. If we can go to the next slide. So so what exactly do these technologies do and how do they work? And so this is a really loaded slide that has a lot of examples, but I'll try and explain what's being shown here. So these are just clips of videos of people who've been in clinical trials of implantable brain-computer interfaces and some of the things that they've been able to use the technology to do. So in the top left corner, you'll see there's a little computer cursor moving on a screen, and this is a participant in a clinical trial of an implantable brain computer interface, and you can actually see there's a little inset there above where he's working, and that's a grid of the electrical activity in individual brain cells from the motor cortex from the brain of that participant. And what he's doing here is he's controlling a computer cursor on a screen, but he's doing it by thinking about moving his hand. So he thinks about moving his hand up, down, left, right, as if he was holding a computer mouse. Those electrical signals are recorded, sent into the computer. The computer figures out what pattern of electrical activity corresponds to what direction he's trying to move his hand, and then the computer cursor goes there. And so, with that sort of control, he's able to, control a computer mouse. You fast forward a few years, and in the bottom right corner, you see two participants who are both sitting in front of Google Nexus tablets. And these are two individuals, both who have ALS, who are also enrolled in a clinical trial of an implantable brain-computer interface. Um, the woman on the left is writing an email. The gentleman on the right is searching YouTube, but they're using that same approach. They're thinking about moving their hand as if they were using a computer mouse. When they want to click on something, they think about squeezing. The computer decodes all of that and gives them the ability to control these completely unmodified, off-the-shelf consumer technologies. As far as the Google Nexus tablet is concerned, they're just controlling it with a mouse. The tablet doesn't realize that it's being controlled by a BCI. And so at this point, this sort of technology is able to really plug into most off-the-shelf consumer technology for this kind of control. The other examples that are shown here are examples of using this technology in different manners for restoring mobility. So there's a video on the left of an individual thinking about opening and closing his hand to control an anthropomorphic robotic arm. The woman in the middle on the bottom, she was thinking about controlling that large robotic arm to try and pick up that thermos and take a drink. And then the gentleman in the middle at the top has had a sort of unique experience. He actually had two surgeries. One was to place the intracortical BCI, implantable BCI, and that's you can see those connectors that are at the top of his head. And then he had a second surgery to place stimulating electrodes in the muscles of his arm. And so when he was using the BCI, he was thinking about moving his arm. The computer decoded those signals and then sent the pattern of decoded signals into a separate system that activated the stimulating electrodes that were in the muscles in his arm to actually give him the ability to contract his own muscles. And so he was using the system to restore mobility and actually controlling his own arm. Um, so these are some of the different ways that people have used IBCIs in clinical trials to demonstrate restoring mobility and different means of communication by controlling computers. And Jessica, if you can go to the next slide. Before you hit play on this, one of the most exciting developments in the field of IBCIs that's come across in the past couple of years, it really represents a big paradigm shift, is what are known as speech neuroprostheses or speech BCIs. And so the idea here is, I'll set it up a little bit. So everything I talked about on the last slide, people using BCIs to control computer cursors and to surf the web and to control robotic arms, all of that was based on using the iBCI sensors to record from the part of the brain that controls the hand, wrist, and arm. And we in the iBCI field have gotten very good at decoding the intended movement of the hand, wrist, and arm that we can predict and use the computers to control systems that need to rely on those movements. But a couple of years ago, some folks in the field said, what if instead of trying to decode the intended movement of the hand, we placed our sensors slightly to the side over the part of the motor cortex that controls the intended movement of the muscles of the face, of the mouth, of the jaw, the muscles that we use to speak. If we could decode what movements someone was trying to make with those muscles, could we predict what they were trying to say, even if they've lost the ability to speak clearly? And so that's exactly what's shown in this video. This IBCI research participant has ALS, his speech is dysarthric, um, uh, but he's going to try and say what's written on the screen. You'll see what the computer decodes from the electrical activity over the part of his motor cortex that controls the movement of his mouth, and then it will play it. And when you hear it played, it'll actually be played in his voice. We're able to use basically voice recordings from before he had symptoms of ALS in order to create a digital version of his voice that he's then able to use with this system. And so if Jessica, you can play that.
Uh, 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 um,
My nurse is very young.
So this was done actually, you can see up top, it says session one. So this was done the first day that he was using the system. They set it up, they did a little bit of calibrating, and he was able to read from the screen and the system could decode what he was trying to say. And Jessica, if you go to the next slide, um, by session two, we said, all right, we're not going to tell you what to say. You just say what you want to say, and we'll see if we can figure out what it is that you're trying to say. If you can hit play, I'll let this just run.
uh, 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 uh,
Below, is this on?
uh, 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 uh,
I have been waiting for this for a long time.
And I think if you hit next, it'll pull up the transcript. So this video, you can tell, was edited a little bit. So some of the things that he was saying in between were taken out. So again, this was the second time that he was using this system. And I think that a little more context of what went on there can sort of provide a little more impact. So the first thing he said is, "Hello, is this on?" Sort of making a joke, as if he was in front of a microphone. And then the next thing that was decoded was, "I'm looking for a cheetah." Now, for the researchers who were in the room with him and for people who work in the sort of BCI field, a lot of this technology relies on sort of sophisticated AI algorithms that are doing the actual decoding. And you say, oh, well, clearly the system, made a mistake because no one would be sitting in their living room in California saying that they're looking for a cheetah. What had actually happened, so this research participant, he's in his mid-40s, and his 4-year-old daughter had actually walked into the room at that moment wearing a cheetah costume. And so he was saying that to her, and it actually had decoded what he was saying perfectly, even though again, no one expected that the second thing he was going to say was a sentence involving a cheetah. So he was able to say that, and in fact, the rest of the conversation is actually a conversation between him and his daughter. And this was really impactful for him and his family. There's a lot of emotions in the room. He was diagnosed when she was still very, very young, and so she had never, she had really no memory of his voice, and so now he's able to talk to his daughter using his voice, using this system. And for this participant, and he's been in the news and stuff, so I'm sure many of you have read about his story. Um, he was nearing having to retire. He had been using an eye gaze tracking system to communicate and work on documents and things of that nature, but it was just too laborious for him and too slow. And he was going to stop working. He's now using this system basically, that's like 24/7, doesn't have it on when he's sleeping, but basically he wakes up in the morning, his care partner turns on the system. He uses it all day, he uses it for work, he uses it to talk with friends and family, and then at the end of the day, they take it off and turn it off, and it's a primary means of communication. And so he's had a really great experience and a really positive outcome from being part of this clinical trial. And really, the hope is that more and more people can have this sort of benefit. We can go to the next slide. Right. So when are these going to be available to the public? And so I sort of intimated a little bit about this early on when I was speaking on the safety. So as I mentioned, right now, if you want an implantable brain-computer interface, you need to be enrolled in a clinical trial, and that's how these things work. With that said, in the past 10 years, and Jessica's going to talk a bit more about this in a moment. There's been a huge transformation in the BCI research space. So 20 years ago, the only BCIs that were really being studied were happening within the walls of sort of academic institutions. So here at Mass General and in some of our sort of related academic medical centers, there were clinical trials that were being run by academics and from research labs trying to understand if this technology was even feasible. And the results have been promising. And so now there's about a dozen or so startups that are all developing BCIs. They're all different in certain ways. They have different types of sensors, and they're sort of targeted for different types of populations with paralysis that can potentially benefit. But the hope is that, and there's now, at least that I can think of, at least 4 clinical trials that are ongoing or about to be ongoing. So the hope is that within a couple of years, the first of these clinical trials will be wrapped up, the results will be reported, and if they're favorable, which we very much hope that they are, that some of these could begin, seeking regulatory approval, so that 5, 10 years from now, someone who's got difficulty communicating because of ALS may see their ALS neurologist or see a speech language pathologist and say, you might really benefit from a BCI, get sent to the sort of clinic where people get evaluated for BCIs, and then come into the hospital, have one placed, and then leave the hospital being able to use it to communicate. I think that was pretty much everything I was going to toss it back to Jessica, talk a little bit more about the IBCICC and where we go from here. And then after that, I saw some great questions, or I saw the first few words of some great questions pop up. So I'm excited to answer those too. But thanks, and I'll toss it back to you, Jessica.
All right, great. Thank you so much. Yeah, so as Dan mentioned, the IBCI space is moving from academia on to the pathway for commercialization, which means that various companies, including the companies that you see on this slide, are either planning or conducting clinical trials, all aiming to get them approved for clinical use and eventually get the devices to the people that need them. So as IBCIs progress beyond academia, key challenges need to be addressed before companies can make IBCIs publicly available for clinical use. And embarking on this process has raised a host of critical unanswered questions. And these questions include things such as which clinical specialties will be prescribing and then maintaining IBCIs, what are the right outcome measures for IBCI clinical trials, and what happens if a commercial entity of an IBCI goes out of business, along with a host of other equally important questions. And so this is where the IBCICC comes in. The field came together to address these questions and help get IBCIs to the people who need them. And we are aiming to do this through 7 topic-specific work groups that are addressing these questions. And while all of these work groups do have relevance to the ALS community, I'll go ahead and just highlight a few that may be of particular interest. So first, I'll highlight the user priorities/preferences and IBCI use cases work group. So this work group focuses on understanding and incorporating the perspectives of potential users into the design, testing, and application of IBCIs. And I'd also like to highlight the clinical practice guidelines work group. This group is working to establish evidence-based guidelines to ensure safe and effective care for people using IBCIs. And finally, I'll highlight the clinical study endpoints work group. And this work group is really driven by the need to clearly define measures that can be used to obtain regulatory approval of IBCIs. And as the IBCICC seeks to address this wide range of challenges, your insights, those of people with ALS, care partners, and advocates, are critical to making sure the field develops in ways that reflect real-world needs and priorities. And the IBCICC provides a space for your perspectives to shape the IBCI field. So I would like to invite all of you to become a part of the IBCICC by going to our website at ibci-cc.org. You can click that blue join button in the corner there. And by joining, you can contribute your expertise, share your insights, and really help us guide the direction of the IBCI field. You will not only be supporting the growth of life-changing technology, you're helping us shape a future where individuals with ALS and other conditions have new, meaningful ways to regain function and independence. We welcome you to be involved in your able capacity. You can be an active participant in our regular meetings. You can also just contribute to offline activities that could include things such as collaborating on files or providing feedback on documents. Or you are also welcome to join in once per quarter to provide your input. We're flexible, so really it's just about contributing as you're able. And I really believe that we can make a difference together, so I hope you'll consider joining. And I think that is all I have, so we can go ahead and open the floor to questions about IBCIs, or if you have any questions about the IBCICC in particular, Dan and I are here to answer them.
Jessica and Dan, thank you. Holy cow, the cheetah costume will stay with me forever. Tears welled up at that one. You know, what could be cooler than being able to comment on your little girl's cheetah costume? It's just awesome. Our team, Megan, could we please include the join link from the IBCICC page? Because I imagine for a lot of people on here, it's difficult to get there. So if we include that in our follow-up email, that'd be great. So we'll send that to you guys for anybody who wants to contribute. And get ready, Jessica, because this is a very engaged community.
Love to
So
hear that.
I think they'll be very helpful. And Dan, you're right. There are a number of questions in there, multisyllabic ones with syllables that I may not do justice to. So I'll let you attack some of those from Dr. Hadley and some of the others.
Sure thing. Yeah, I've now that I've got them open, these are all great questions, and I'll do my best to give them all the best answer I can. So I'll start with Dr. Hadley, who asked a great question about implants for control of cranial nerve function. So there was one small video that you saw there where one research participant had, and these are what, I mean, there's a number of different ways to describe these, but broadly described as bidirectional BCIs. So most of the BCIs that we think about are recording neural activity and then sending them to control a computer, some other robotic or mechanical device. These bidirectional systems are ones like that individual who was controlling his own arm had a BCI that was decoding what he was trying to do with his arm and then using that to stimulate the muscles in his arm so that he could contract those muscles. So the question is, has there been any research in doing that same thing for implants that can control the cranial nerves? So for assistance with speech or swallow. The short answer is none that I know of. But the more complex and lengthier answer is none that I know of, but there's no reason why there couldn't be. And I think in particular, in the coming years, there's going to be a lot more people who have BCIs. And I think that once these become more widely adopted, the opportunities for those kind of research questions, I think, are going to be, the barrier to conduct that kind of research is going to come way down. And I think there's going to be, a real explosion in other ways that this technology can be adapted. One of the things that we've learned in our research is that as much as we think we know what the best way to do something is, we learn way more from our research participants than they learn from us, to put it lightly. And so we get started with the system, we design something to work a certain way, and they tell us, no, 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 that's not what you need to do this, or you need to do this, or these settings should be like this. And then we make the system work that much better. And so I think once these become more widely available and people say, well, let's get it working with some other device that allows me to do the following, that allows, can work with other types of stimulation to help me swallow better, to help me speak more clearly. I think we're going to see a lot of that. And I'll jump over one question. I do want to talk about the question about Apple products, but just because it sort of dovetails. Barbara had asked about BCI trials to restore walking and mobility, and the answer is yes. So it's a different challenge in a number of ways, but there have been IBCIs that have specifically focused on gait restoration. This is mostly for no particular reason other than sort of the historical precedent where these things developed. There's a group in Switzerland that's really been leading that. But there's also, I say that, but there's also groups in the US that are working on that. But if you were to Google for it, it would be the instead of a BCI, they call it a BSI, a brain spine interface, but technology that can record from the part of motor cortex that controls walking, and then either stimulate the spinal cord or bypass the spinal cord to try and restore gait. For a number of reasons, a lot of them sort of surrounding safety. You can imagine that it presents some additional logistical challenges because you have to do it safely because you don't want people to fall. But there is research in that direction, and that is a big priority for a lot of people and for a lot of research groups too. Um, there was a question about Synchron's pairing with Apple, and it was very exciting for those of you who didn't see the news. It was a couple of I think months ago at this point, that Apple announced a partnership with Synchron, which is one of these companies developing an implantable BCI, that they had announced the first, they call it a human interface device, HID, for BCI. And so basically what this means is what Apple said was they worked with one of these startups in the BCI space to make Apple products recognize a BCI as a native controller. And for a lot of folks, that's, what does that mean? And the basic idea is in the videos I showed you of people controlling computers using a BCI, the way that they were able to control computers is that the researchers tricked the computers into thinking they would be controlled by a Bluetooth mouse. And so when a computer is being controlled by a Bluetooth mouse, you can move the cursor around, but the computer can also send information back to the mouse about what's being controlled. Um, by making the Apple products recognize BCIs as a native device, it basically means that Apple knows it's being controlled by a BCI. It's not only optimized for the kind of things that BCIs can do, so you don't have to sort of work your way around what mice are supposed to do. You can actually do what the BCI is supposed to be done. So you can sort of unlock greater potential and greater usability. And it also gives the Apple devices the ability to communicate back with the BCI about what's happening. So it gives you more precise control. It sort of adds a feedback loop into the whole system. The hope, of course, is that other consumer electronic device product makers are going to follow suit, and this will become a new standard. I mean, that would be my hope, but that was really exciting to see. Um, Lynn notes that it's true, less than 150 people worldwide have had a BCI. I suspect it's even lower than that. If you were to ask me how many people have had an IBCI so far, I would estimate somewhere probably less than 80, probably in that neighborhood. But again, if you were to plot how many have had them over time, you would see that it's a very rapidly accelerating curve. I think those numbers are going to keep rising. And a question about thought to text versus motor cortex. That's a great question. This is my I should say these are all great questions. This happens to be my area of particular research interest, and so I can probably talk more about this than any of you want to listen. But and if I've and Spiro, if I've misinterpreted your question, just let me know. But what I think the question is, so for the speech decoding work that I showed you, the way that that system works is that we record from motor cortex and we try to figure out, based on the muscle movements that the person is trying to make, what words they're trying to say. And if you do that, you can get a pretty good sense of what they're trying to say. And then we use rather sophisticated AI tools that are sort of the same things that sort of power the speech to text tools that are built into iPhones and stuff these days to predict what words the person's trying to say. And I showed you some videos of someone using it really effectively, but of course, like anything, these things vary in their performance, and there's lots of other factors that are involved. Um, the notion of thought to text is, what if we skip the motor cortex and we just try and figure out what is the person trying to say based on some higher order semantic information about language. So when I try to talk, you know, the first thing that part of my brain does is figure out what do I want to say, and then there's another part of the brain that turns that into words, and then there's another part that breaks that down into the individual movements that my muscles need to make. And when we decode the individual movements that the muscles need to make, you can expect a certain degree of performance. But if you could figure out at a higher level what I was trying to say, could you decode faster, more accurately, with greater sort of nuance and individuality? Could you include things like, what tone of voice am I using? Am I using my classic deadpan humor, or am I being very serious, or am I, you know, you sort of get the idea. And I think there's a lot of people within the BCI community who are really hopeful that that sort of decoding is going to allow us to really improve this technology, make it work for more people, make it work faster, make it work more accurately. That's still very much in the domain of academic research groups. I think something that's doing that sort of decoding is going to require that we understand a little bit more about the brain than we do right now. So we're not there yet. I wouldn't call it science fiction, but I think that's really the next scientific breakthrough that we're going to be looking for. And thank you, Peter. I do sometimes speak a little too quickly, and so I apologize. Um, so, um, what is the output post-surgery for the implants? Is it obvious for people seeing this in normal life? So I'll have to think about uh, exactly. Well, I can tell you a little bit about the surgery, and then we can go from there. So most of the videos that were on the montages that I showed you, you saw people had they had little adapters or transmitters that were connecting the implanted devices to computer systems. And that's a thing that we on the academic side have been doing for the past 20 years. None of the startups, none of the devices that are being developed for commercialization, none of the devices that your doctor is going to prescribe to you are ever going to have something sticking out of your head. So all of the modern devices that are being developed by the startups that are undergoing clinical trials right now are all fully implanted systems. So the way that it works is that there's a sensor, and the sensor is underneath the skull sitting on the surface of the brain. And then for most of the devices, there's then what's called a tunneled lead. So a little thing that gets sort of tucked underneath the skin, and then there's a transmitter, and that transmitter is usually sitting under the chest wall. So much like a cardiac pacemaker or a vagus nerve stimulator, and then those communicate wirelessly. And so for all of the devices that are undergoing testing right now, the short answer is, once someone recovered from the surgery, you would have no idea that somebody has one of those devices unless you were to go over and sort of put your hand on their chest and feel, oh, you've got a pacemaker, and then you say, no, it's not a pacemaker, it's a BCI, but same concept. There are some where those electronics are actually placed directly into a thing that goes sort of in the skull bone, but that's but the idea is they're all still fully implanted, so you'd never see that. The days of these transmitters being attached to something sticking out of the head, those days are numbered, and those are really, again, limited to the academic research groups. And
Dan, first, I remember Stephen Haywood, who was the reason for which ALS TDI was founded, as John talked about, in Brain Great early work back in like 2005. I was at his house and watched the team working with him with, something sticking out of his head, but it was pretty amazing. But can you speak to what's involved in the surgery? People, as they are farther along in their progression with ALS, have difficulty with anesthesia. Can you talk a little bit about that?
sure. Um, the devices that are available do at the moment require surgery. And for most people who are going to have this surgery, the anesthesia becomes sort of the big risk that they think about, right? So for the most part, if you need to have general anesthesia, that means you need to have a breathing tube put in. Um, when we've worked with research participants, there's a long conversation about the safety of doing that, how to do that, what to expect after someone's had anesthesia. For people who already use a ventilator, it really would be a sort of it would be much lower risk. But for someone who doesn't use a ventilator, you, you'd want to have, a conversation about the relative risks of being able to do that. If someone is in good health, we expect that they should be able to have the breathing tube taken out right after it's put in. But if someone were in a sort of tenuous spot, it would be it'd be a conversation you need to have. Other than the anesthesia, the rest of the risks are, and again, it depends on what sort of device you're talking about specifically. They vary. So most of the implantable BCIs require a craniotomy, which is to say that a small bit of the skull is taken off, the sensors are placed directly on the surface, and then either the skull or some other covering is put back. No one leaves the hospital with a hole in their skull or anything like that. One device that was asked about is the Synchron device. That one works a little bit differently. That is an implantable BCI, but it doesn't go on the surface of the brain. It actually goes into a large blood vessel. That sits in between the two cortical hemispheres, and so that gets placed through a catheter, like an endovascular catheter. So that one's more similar, if anyone has ever had or had family members who had like a cardiac catheterization, where they thread a wire basically in through a blood vessel. And so that BCI is a little different. And the hope, because many catheter-based procedures can be done with uh, lighter sedation, that one potentially could avoid the need for full anesthesia. Although I'll have to admit I haven't actually been part of having one of those devices placed or seeing one of those placed, so I don't know the details of what their operative protocol is. Um, but yeah, that's in the BCIs that I've been a part of placing, people have them placed. They stay in the hospital for a couple of days, make sure that they feel good, and they go home.
Incredible. And I had one other question too. So, and I may be thinking of this all wrong, so you can help me. And there must be a brain to the BCI, right? That is determining which messages to pick up, the ones that aren't noise.
That's
And
right.
I'm used to that process being honed using machine learning applications and large cohort sizes to train a model, an algorithm. Is that how it's done?
Yeah, that's actually a really good summary of it. Yeah. So, for most of these devices, that's sort of exactly it. So someone has a BCI placed, and then there's some period of time during which you train the decoder, you train the machine learning model, the AI algorithm. So there's some calibration period where somebody thinks about what they want to do, and they do so in an instructed way, so that the computer, that is the brain, that's outside of the brain, knows how to create that one-to-one pairing between the brain signals and the attempted movement. How long it takes to train the system really depends on what you're trying to do with it. So if the goal is to control a computer cursor on a screen, that's a pretty straightforward thing for the computer to learn the relationship between the brain signals and control of a two-dimensional cursor. That can be done in 30 seconds, 45 seconds. For decoding intended speech, that's more complex. And so the amount of data that it takes to train the system to do that, that can take a couple of hours. But what the more sophisticated systems are able to do is to start training with some what are called sort of open loop or some sort of very basic calibration tasks where you do exactly what you're told and then the system learns. And then from there, once you're able to use the system, can continue to learn and adapt and really sort of self-calibrate over time so that if you see errors, you point out errors using the system said, all right, I made some mistakes. Keep going. I'm going to learn from those mistakes and I'm going to continue to sort of tailor my responses to your brain signals as I learn over time. In the same way, this is one of those things some people might on this call might not realize, but the more text messages you send on the phone, the fewer spelling errors it makes for unusual words that you use a lot. So that, if you have nicknames for your family members, eventually your iPhone realizes, oh, that's what he's trying to type. The systems sort of learn in the background in the same way. And so the amount of sort of overt pausing you need for calibration is hopefully coming down over time.
That's incredible. A
Thank you.
couple hours. I bet there are some people here who would be willing to train for a couple of hours.
I
That's
mean, and the hope, I mean, and there's a lot of research, and this is again more on the academic side. There's a lot of research of trying to leverage this sort of approaches that have been taken with other AI tools. As more and more data is acquired, can we learn how the brain works in general so that that you can do this with less individual calibration and more just sort of plug and play with some fine tuning around the edges. There's a lot that goes into that, as you can imagine, both from a computational and engineering standpoint, but also from a privacy and ethics standpoint, because brain signals are, that's your you, right? That's yourself, and so there's a lot of conversation that's been had, and a lot of really thoughtful people who put a lot of time into making sure that we're able to make these systems work, but also, protect everyone's autonomy.
yeah.
Um, I want to make sure I answer. So Francois mentions uh, so Neuro is one of the wearable devices that's had some really great control, and he's got a link to some of the stuff that they've been able to do. And definitely check that out. And then Lynn asked questions about frontal cortex implant with motor cortex, and I think this is getting at some of that higher order decoding. So trying to skip some of the motor decoding and go straight to what is the person trying to do, what is the person trying to say. And I would say, I think from well, that's one possible thing that Lynn might be asking. The other question is whether or not we could record from frontal cortex to treat symptoms other than those directly related to weakness. And the answer to both of those is soon, but not quite as soon as some of the other stuff that I've talked about. So there are research groups that have started placing some of these sensors in um, parts of frontal cortex, and I realize not everyone on the calls is into neuroanatomy as I am, and so that's okay. But the idea is that motor cortex is this relatively isolated region that specifically controls movement, and then frontal cortex is really what we think about as, to some extent, being, although it's more complex than this, of course, where a lot of our sort of thoughts and intentions originate. And so I don't want to say our consciousness, because consciousness is this abstract concept that we don't really fully understand. But if you were to try and understand what someone's trying to do before they even generated the intention to move a limb, you might think about recording from frontal cortex. And if you were also trying to treat symptoms that were beyond just those caused by weakness, so neurocognitive symptoms, for example, you might be recording from frontal cortex and trying to use those signals to treat those symptoms. Um, there's a lot of great research going on. I think it's unlikely that the first generation of these devices is really going to focus on those kind of symptoms. You can imagine, just to the extent that I'm even struggling to describe what these sensors do and where they record from, you can imagine it's going to be more complicated to actually do the sort of things that people are thinking about doing with them. But um, whereas 10 years ago, even I might have said that that's approaching science fiction. I've now realized that it's really not. And the ability of these devices to do really incredible things. And um, part of this is due, I think, mostly to the incredible research that's happened over the past 10, 15 years, where we've learned so much from research participants who have volunteered their time and energy and really themselves, right? They've given their brains in real time to help develop these tools so that other people with ALS can have the ability to use this technology. And then another big part of it is just the incredible advances in AI and machine learning that we've seen in the past 5, 10 years, where the sort of problems that we're able to solve, the sort of homework sets that high school kids can do these days, where, when I was in graduate school, these were the unsolvable problems of machine learning that will never be solved because they just are too complex. And so it just goes to show you, stick around long enough and you find some solutions. Um, I'm looking here. So, 14% survivability to the IBCIs that were implanted. Um, right. So there's a lot of, I think this gets at sort of the sensor technology. And there's, as much as I've really been highlighting to some extent I mean, most of what I've described and most of what I've talked about, is really comes down to the algorithms, like the software, right? What do we do with these brain signals once we record from them? But there is just as much um, reliance and there's just as much importance in thinking about the hardware. What are these sensors actually made out of, right? So this is where it's not just the computer systems and the AI algorithms, but the material scientists and the electrical engineers who are actually putting together these chips, these devices, these sensors. And so it's absolutely right that it's important that these devices don't just work, but they work for a long time, right? You want to have one of these, if you're going to have one of these devices placed, you want it to be placed once. You don't want to placed, you don't want to have it, taken out and revised or anything like that. And there's been a lot of great advances, and in fact, one of the things that really distinguishes, Jessica had that slide up with about a dozen different companies that are developing these technologies, and to some extent, although there are some notable differences in the sort of under the hood hardware, they're all sort of take the same approach, which is to say they use machine learning to figure out what these neural signals are doing and then find a clever way to use them to help people. But what really makes a lot of these devices different is in the hardware, whether they're using different types of materials or different manufacturing processes or different sort of designs for the sensors. And this gets to a level of electrical engineering that's beyond me, but how the different wires come together on a microchip and how those microchips get assembled into the devices that ultimately project out the signals. And so, well, time will tell, right? So these are devices that are now in clinical trial. The primary outcomes that people are looking at are things like safety and efficacy, but one of the big things that all of us in the community are really focused on is longevity too. So how long do these devices continue to produce good signals? Like most technologies, there's generally a trend in the positive direction that, with newer generations of these devices, signals seem to be lasting longer and looking good. But there's also there's a lot of variability. And so, I think with 12 companies out there, we're hopeful that they're all going to be successful because they're all going to benefit patients. And there's probably some that are going to work better for some patients than others. I think, what it's going to come down to in many instances is when somebody's thinking about having a BCI, if they're faced with more than one choice, should I have this device or this device or this device? I don't know that it's going to be a sort of VHS versus Betamax thing where there's going to be one clear winner and everyone else is going to disappear. What I suspect is that each device and each company is going to have sort of their pros and cons. They're going to say, well, this device, works really well for decoding speech for communication, whereas this device is really focused on restoring mobility and controlling robotics. And this device doesn't require, an endotracheal tube and that kind of anesthesia because of the way that it's placed. And so I think that's really what we're saying. And to the extent that different devices have different track records for longevity, that may also impact people's decisions. Um, Peter asked about how we're funded and if we need donations. I don't want to say anything that's going to be in trouble, so I will say the academic research is largely funded by research grants, NIH, NSF. So anything that anyone here can do to make sure that those are, can continue
Huh.
to flow, please, do what you can. There's also quite a bit of philanthropy, as you can imagine as well. And then the private companies are startups, and so they're funded by, venture capitalists and investors. And then I will turn any questions about donations over to Jessica because I'm sure if I gave any other answer, I would get in trouble.
Yes, sorry, and I realize we're going over, but just to
Oh, I'm
quickly
sorry.
answer the question about how the IBCITC in particular is funded, we are funded through our sponsorship partners. So that is currently Paradromics, Synchron, BlackRock, Neuralink, and Precision Neuroscience. And we are continuing to seek additional sponsorship as we continue to grow. So definitely reach out if you are interested in donating.
Well, thank you, Jessica, for helping to provide the forum for some of those big questions to be addressed by all the stakeholders, because I believe you will encounter them all. I think you're headed that way, which is good news, right? If you can pre-solve them, particularly. Jessica, Dan, anything else you want to say before we kind of close up a little bit?
I just want to thank everyone for being on and the great questions. This was I mean I always love talking about this stuff and I can tell from the questions that I think this audience has got a keen interest in this work, so I think that's great. And I'm excited about where things are going and next time I get a chance to talk to you all, I hope there's a lot of exciting updates.
Yeah, thank you all for coming. And yeah, agreed. Great questions. It's fantastic to see such great engagement from this community. So if you're interested in also engaging with the IBCICC, I did put the link to join in the chat, and it sounds like we'll also send it out afterward as well.
Well, this was, I think you can see it in the chat, really very exciting, really moving, by the number of people who are on here and engaged and interested. This community is at your service, I believe. Sorry if you hear the dog. And all of us at ALS TDI are very grateful to the two of you for your time and your passion, and to everybody else on here for their great questions and engagement. We will, as I wrote in the chat, this has been recorded, and it will appear in a few days on the town hall page at ALS TDI, which is als.net. If there are, we will print out the chat to make sure that we covered all of the questions. If we did not, we will get to you. On this call are members of the development team, Michelle Dupree, Glennis Murray, Melissa Payne, and Courtney Mish, whose camera may be off because she's on vacation, but she's a good doobie and is on here anyway. One of these wonderful people will reach out to you for your feedback. Please offer it both on this town hall and on future ones. We want to hear your ideas for what you want to learn, what you want to talk about. Glennis, you have your hand raised. Did you want to say something? Inadvertent hand raise. John, glad that didn't happen to you. If you know, you know. Everybody, thank you. Dan, Jessica, so grateful. Thanks, everybody.
So thank you as always, John and Jessica and Dan. Fantastic.
That was great, right, Peter? Yeah, amazing. Thanks, everybody.